Hello, how are you? Today I'm going to teach you how to burn more calories without having to do physical exercise. Many people think that to lose weight, you have to spend hours on the treadmill, hours at the gym, or cut out food completely, drastically reduce calories. That's not true. In this video, I'm going to show you a scientific discovery that will change the game for you. Two people with exactly the same age, same height, and same weight can spend the entire day sitting in the same room, and still, one of them will burn hundreds of calories more than the other. I'm going to explain to you how this happens and how to further optimize this expenditure, regardless of physical activity. I'm sure you're going to love it, especially because there are some people who don't have time to exercise, there are people who don't have medical clearance to do physical exercise, so you're going to love it. Stay until the end because you won't want to miss it. Before we start, I want to ask you if you usually do physical activity or not, if you like it or not. I'd love to see your comment. Write it for me down here in the comments. A big mistake people make is thinking that the gym or physical activity is the only place where our body can manage to burn a large amount of fat on a daily basis. In reality, formal physical exercise, the kind where you put on gym clothes, put on your sneakers, and either go out for a walk or go to the gym to work out, represents a very small slice, only between 5 and 15% of our total energy expenditure. So we can train for an hour a day and spend the other 23 hours metabolically frozen, which is what we don't want, right? When we think about our daily metabolic expenditure, our daily basal expenditure, there are 4 factors included there. The first is the basal metabolic rate, right? Which spends more or less 60 to 70% of everything we consume to keep our organs alive, heart beating, brain functioning, everything working properly in our body. The second is the thermic effect of food. That is, it is the energy that our body spends to digest food, to take that food and transform it into nutrients for our organism. There is also NEAT, which is the energy spent on absolutely everything we do that isn't directed physical exercise. Meaning this right here that I'm doing, gesturing, talking, cooking, cleaning the house, getting up from a chair. And in some people who are very active, this NEAT, right, this activity factor, which is not physical activity, of non-exercise activity thermogenesis, can even reach 1,500 calories per day just from these activities that are not physical exercise. And this is where we start giving you some information, right? Where I start giving you some tips that can really help increase your expenditure without you having to do targeted physical exercise. When we think about boosting metabolism, there's no way we can't start by talking about our hormones, right? We know that insulin, other hormones, thyroid hormone, and many others are related to being able to increase basal metabolic rate and make us burn more fat. So when we manage to master this issue of insulin, it really helps with the ability to lose weight even without exercise. Because think with me, spending the day snacking on a piece of toast, a cookie, a bread, drinking juice, this ends up creating constant spikes of glucose in our blood, and every time sugar rises quickly, the pancreas gets a shock, right, and dumps a flood of insulin into our circulation. Insulin is that storage hormone, right? When it is chronically high, it activates an enzyme that completely blocks hormone-sensitive lipase, which is the master key that opens the fat cell so it can be burned. In other words, with insulin very high, we block fat burning in our body, which is exactly the opposite of what we want. So, a body that constantly has insulin spikes is as if it has locked away this fat-burning hormone, and that is everything we don't want. Not being able to access those fat reserves that already exist in our body, which are stored there, right? Which is what will actually make us lose weight and decrease our body fat percentage. Besides that, there's another very bad issue, because after this glucose spike, this insulin spike, you end up having reactive hypoglycemia because you end up having an overproduction of this insulin. So the glucose drops a lot, and then the brain thinks you're going to faint. Anyway, it gets to lower levels. So this triggers cortisol, ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone, and that gives you that desperate hunger, that urge even to eat pasta and sweets. So to break this cycle and unlock fat burning, the ideal thing is for us to space out meals, avoid snacking, control the quantity, and especially the quality of carbohydrates, and always prioritize proteins, healthy fats, and fiber to keep glucose more stable. The second thing that is super important, right, is to do some kind of exercise that naturally captures glucose, but it's not about going to the gym. It's about keeping yourself more active in the right way. Remember, I told you that. So I'm not talking here about you putting on sneakers and walking, going up and down stairs. It's nothing like that. The issue is that when you stay sitting for 8-10 hours straight, scrolling on your phone, lying down, it ends up being a metabolic disaster for our body, because when we stay static for a long time, the absence of muscle contraction of those muscles I told you about, right? From gesturing, talking, picking something up, washing dishes, from the activities of daily life itself, ends up turning off this lipoprotein lipase again. So it's as if it were a broom that sweeps up the fat that's just hanging around in the blood to use as energy. And when we don't move, this broom stops and the fat is left over in the circulation. Furthermore, these locks on our cells that take sugar from the blood, which are the so-called GLUT4 that I always talk to you about here, end up going down, becoming more hidden. So the sugar is left over in the blood, insulin sensitivity is heavily impacted, and the metabolism can worsen, freeze up, let's say. So the biological trick for us to turn on this engine without going to the gym, without you having to go for a walk or do targeted exercise, is in the soleus muscle, which is located in the calf in our leg. In fact, I even have a video here on the channel talking about why this muscle is increasingly considered and called a second heart, because the veins in the legs depend on the contraction of the calf to pump the blood back up. When we move our calves, when we do this pumping action, it compresses these vessels, these arteries, well, actually the vessels that return the blood, and it facilitates the return circulation, overcoming gravity. And Harvard scientists have shown that small activations of this muscle double the speed at which our body burns sugar and fat in that region. So if you can manage to get up every 40 minutes or so and walk around the house while you're on the phone, or even while you're doing something on your phone, or just do the movement of going up and down on your tiptoes, standing on your tiptoes and coming back down while you're sitting and watching TV, it will be much more beneficial. This micro movement activates these GLUT4 locks and makes sugar get burned more easily. So if you can at least manage to do this kind of movement in your daily life, you'll see that your overall daily energy expenditure will be impacted in a very positive way. Another super important thing is the relationship between the gut and weight gain. One of the greatest discoveries of modern medicine is precisely the role of this very important organ, right? The entire gut in weight gain, weight loss, and everything else. We already know nowadays that a poor diet, very full of ultra-processed products, low in fiber, alters the intestinal walls, creating a condition called intestinal hyperpermeability, known as leaky gut, right? So imagine that the intestinal walls act like a sieve that decides what gets in, what doesn't, what is bacteria, what is worth absorbing or not, right? Into our bloodstream, into our internal body. So with this condition, the sieve stretches out and becomes full of holes. And through these holes, pieces of dead bacteria called LPS leak directly into our bloodstream. The scientific name for this is metabolic endotoxemia. So when these LPS enter the blood, they activate alarm receptors in our liver and fat cells, which are the TLR4, generating a low-grade chronic inflammation in our body. These inflammatory molecules travel to our brain, mess up the signal of leptin, which is the hormone that tells us we are satisfied, that we can stop eating, and make our body retain more energy. So, to help clean these filters and effectively reduce systemic inflammation, we need to feed our good bacteria with prebiotic fibers, such as chia, flaxseed, oats, legumes like chickpeas and lentils, or psyllium, and consistently provide our gut with beneficial live bacteria, which are the probiotics. I have a playlist here on the channel on how to prepare probiotics at home. Various recipes, yogurt, kefir, fermented cabbage, fermented apple, oats. There are several fermented foods that are naturally probiotics, and this helps produce beneficial fatty acids that help seal those holes in the gut back up and calms the metabolism, also favoring this issue of weight loss and not gaining more fat. So this is a very important tip. Another issue has to do with our water intake, because water isn't just for quenching our thirst. It is the raw material for a process called lipolysis, which is the breakdown of fat. Lipolysis occurs in an aqueous environment. For every fat molecule that our body needs to destroy, right, needs to oxidize, it mandatorily requires water molecules to perform this breakdown, this chemical breakdown. So if you are always dehydrated, right, never remember to drink water, and this ends up being even more common after 40, 50, 60 years old, because our sense of thirst ends up decreasing. Our liver ends up becoming overloaded, and the efficiency of the mitochondria, which are the cell's energy plants, plummets. So studies show that drinking 2 cups of very cold water speeds up the metabolism by up to 30% for an hour, because the body spends pure energy to heat this water to our body's internal temperature. Furthermore, we can still accelerate all of this by adding 3 natural activators wisely, of course, right, with common sense. The first one is black coffee because caffeine blocks adenosine in the brain, which causes sleepiness and fatigue and increases the release of catecholamines, which is our natural adrenaline that signals the breakdown of stored fat. In other words, naturally, when we drink coffee, it's not like we're going to drink coffee and go out for a run, no. But you will feel more active to do your day-to-day things right at home. The second thing is green tea, which we know is very rich in polyphenols, right? EGCG, which prevents the body from breaking down our adrenaline. In other words, green tea makes the fat-burning signal last much longer in our body, favoring calorie burning, fat burning as well, and the weight loss process. And the third is chili pepper, which contains capsaicin, which activates heat sensors in our sympathetic nervous system, raising body temperature and energy expenditure at rest. So adding, besides water, which is the basic, the fundamental, right? Nothing replaces water, but adding coffee, green tea, a little bit of pepper to your daily routine can also have a very interesting impact on your metabolism. If you're enjoying the video, if you could leave a like and share it with someone you think would like it, that helps me a lot here on the channel. Another issue has to do with the type of fat we have in our body. There's a type of fat in our body that is really crazy. It helps burn more fat. We have two types of fat in our body. White fat, which is the subcutaneous kind, the one that accumulates on the belly, the love handles, and serves as an energy reserve, and brown adipose tissue. Brown fat is a good type of fat. I already have an entire video talking about it here on the channel on how to activate it more. It's really cool because it's rich in iron, full of mitochondria, and has a special protein called thermogene. And the only function of brown fat is to take calories and turn them purely into heat to warm up our body. So when we expose ourselves to the cold, like when we manage to stay in a milder temperature, depending on the area where you live, it's more complicated because if it's a tropical country, the ideal is that you try to lower your body temperature. Some people do this with air conditioning and everything, but there are also colder showers. Some people even get into those ice baths. It doesn't have to be anything that radical, but a colder shower, turning the water down at the end, for the last 30 seconds, from warm water to cold water, activates this brown fat and makes the body burn white fat to keep you warmer. So it's a great thing that you can also add to your daily routine. When we take all these things and add them up, the difference in metabolism altogether ends up being quite significant. Of course, we also have to talk about sleep, right? One of the biggest enemies of metabolism after 50, 60 years old, especially for women after menopause, is poorly slept nights. Sleeping less than 6 hours a night dysregulates our hormones in the hypothalamus. This causes leptin to plummet, which is that hormone that signals satiety, and increases ghrelin, which is the hormone that gives you that urge to eat, that more uncontrolled hunger. So biologically, we wake up with our brain thinking it's going through an energy crisis, and then it will crave bread, cookies, cake, sweets, juice, more caloric things. To make matters worse, lack of sleep, as we already know, raises cortisol, can lead to insulin resistance and central fatigue, which hinders that NEAT, right? In other words, you're already more tired, stressed because of the cortisol, so you stay quieter that day, right? You're going to be a person who naturally won't do as many things while standing or being active. You'll end up sitting or lying down more. So, by being more prostrate, without the energy to move around, it really hinders your metabolism, as I've already explained to you before. Another very important thing is for us to protect our muscle tissue from self-destruction. Many women and men who have passed 40, 50, 60 years old already start to notice it seems like the metabolism falls a bit asleep, doesn't it? So physiologically, it's not that the metabolism has died or is in crisis. What happens in this age group is a process that I've already talked about quite a bit here on the channel, which is sarcopenia, the progressive loss of muscle mass and strength, which ends up coming with age for some people, many people. So when we manage to try to reverse this by eating more protein sources throughout the day, in a fractionated way, we end up providing our body with a very important amino acid, which is leucine, as if it had a little button, a muscle building switch, the mTOR, in our body. mTOR is the greatest biological brake against catabolism, so it prevents our body from destroying muscle tissue. The second essential step, for sure, has to do with avoiding very restrictive diets. Many people looking to shed extra weight fall into the common trap of following ultra-restrictive diets that cut calories far too drastically, right? So these very restrictive diets, starving yourself, our body goes into a lot of stress, cortisol spikes, and then it goes straight to the muscle, burning more muscle tissue and precisely storing energy in the form of calories. So the ideal is that you don't go on ultra-restrictive diets, always use common sense, and always provide a little bit of protein in every meal to keep your muscle functional, at a basal level in your day-to-day life. Remember that muscle is the most metabolically active tissue we have in our body, and maintaining it will allow you to burn more energy just by existing, just by breathing there. Another really cool tip has to do with the type of food we consume, because not every calorie we eat behaves the same way inside us. If we consume 100 calories from a cookie from sugar, our body absorbs that basically instantly with no effort at all. Now, if we consume protein, eggs, chicken, fish, meat, they have a heavier and more complex molecular structure. So, to break them down into smaller pieces, the stomach and the liver need to do harder work. In nutrition, this is called the thermic effect of food. So, while fats and carbohydrates require almost zero effort to digest, proteins take about 20 to 30% of their own calories just to be processed by the body. So it's as if you were eating a food that already comes with a discount, right, for this whole absorption process. So if you, theoretically speaking, were to eat 100 calories of protein, in reality, you only absorb basically 70 to 80 calories of those 100 you ingested. Then there's something even more interesting, which is that when this protein reaches the end of the intestine, it chemically stimulates the L cells, which trigger two hormones, GLP-1, which we talk about so much these days with weight loss pens, right? And peptide YY. So they go straight to the brain, signaling that you are full, turning off the neurochemical urge to snack on sweets. So protein helps preserve muscle mass, improves the feeling of satiety, and helps with this issue because on its own, it basically has fewer calories due to the thermic effect. So it's a super interesting food for us to prioritize in our daily diet. Of course, we have to remember that although these strategies greatly increase caloric expenditure, especially when you do all or several of them, right, the cumulative effect is very large. We cannot think of this as a substitute for physical exercise, especially because physical exercise is not just for losing weight, right? It's to improve cardiovascular health, well-being, and health as a whole. So they won't replace cardiovascular training or weight training, especially when well supervised by a professional in the field. Another thing I want to tell you is that when we use thermogenics like coffee, green tea, or chili pepper, we always have to respect our body's individual tolerance. So if you suffer from anxiety, insomnia, gastritis, hypertension, the ideal thing is to consult a nutritionist or doctor in your city to guide you, in person about this. Another thing, remember that health is always built with balance, right? The middle path, never with excesses. So just because coffee, green tea, and chili pepper are good for you, it doesn't mean you should consume large doses. The ideal thing is that you always use common sense. Now tell me here in the comments which of these strategies you are going to apply to your routine today. I would love to see your comment. If this content helped you, leave a like on the video and also share it with more people who you think need these tips. Let's expand our chain of kindness. And if you are new here, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. There is a new video every day and you won't want to miss it. See you next time. Bye.